Well, welcome. We are back for episode 2 of the Accessible God podcast. For those of you who were with us in our initial episode, we thank you for listening and we thank you for giving a try out. In our second episode, if this is your first time listening, we hope that this is a good experience for you and that you get a lot out of this. And yeah, you come back and listen to more. I am one of your hosts. My name is Hank Jenkins, and I am here with my co-host Jonathan Campbell. Jonathan, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Hank.
Well,
Good to be
good.
here.
Well, good. It's good to it's good to hear your voice, and we are recording this episode on Mother's Day. Now, you probably will not be listening to it on Mother's Day, but we
You
are.
absolutely won't be listening to it on Mother's Day.
Well, unless it's a year from now that you're listening to it, you
That's true. That's true. In 2030, when you're listening to this on Mother's Day.
exactly. No, but we are here on Mother's Day today, and we thought we might get a little shout out to our mothers, as Jonathan said last week. Hi, Mom.
Hi, Mom.
Yeah. No, but we thought I thought we might get a little start out by giving a shout out to our mothers and telling a good story about our mothers. And yeah, so Jonathan, why don't you get us started with that?
Well, I mean, a good story, I guess, about my mom would be, as we talked about last time, I have learning disabilities. And in terms of schooling, there's no question that's been the biggest issue I've dealt with and had to face. And I was one of the first kids mainstreamed, which was just basically essentially they threw people with disabilities into public schools without much uh, actual preparation on either side. And so I actually had parents who protested my being there. They worried that their kids could get cerebral palsy. Um, I won't blame them too much because they didn't have the Google machine, but still kind of lazy on their part to not actually find out what cerebral palsy is. But my mom had to fight for me to be in school, be included. And then when learning disabilities, when they discovered I had them, she had to fight to get teachers to take it seriously and to give me the supports I needed. She actually got the nickname, I won't say it out loud because we're trying to be a family friendly podcast, but the early schools I went to, she was known as the B word
Wow.
because of the fact she was relentless in saying, look, this is what I need. This is what my child needs. And he's needs to succeed and you need to give him these things. And so there is no question that I would not be sitting here as a pastor. I would not have graduated high school, college, or had master's degrees without the fact she did that for me. And then she also taught me those skills. I learned from her how to advocate for myself. And so no question, she is a blessing to me. And so thank you, and Mom, and happy Mother's Day, whether you're listening to this on Mother's Day or not.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, and I have, um, though I have a different disability, a similar stories of my mother. As we said last week, I'm a paraplegic. I was in a car accident whenever I was 7. But I can remember as a child growing up, my mother basically was teaching me how to be independent. And she taught me how to advocate for myself by being an advocate for me, right?
Yeah.
Um, I can remember several times, whether it be in school or places that we went out to in public, mom was always making sure that those places included me or made space for me. And if they weren't, if they were trying to get out of making space for me, mom made it an issue, and she made sure that they knew that they didn't have the right to do that. There's one story in particular that I think of. When I was a kid, I remember uh, going to a friend's birthday party that was at a skating rink, and and for whatever reason, the skating rink wasn't going to allow me to go in and be with everybody else because I think my mom, our plan was that I would just get on the rink floor, roller rink floor, and just push around in my wheelchair. But for whatever reason, this roller skating rink was afraid of me doing that, and so they wouldn't allow me in. And mom just read them their rights. And I remember as a child looking at it and just being astonished and kind of proud of my mom. But just in her actions and seeing her do that, she taught me how to stick up for myself. And mom always told me, um, yes, you have this disability, but I want you to grow up to be independent and to learn to take care of yourself, and advocating for yourself is going to be a part of that. So as you said, I love my mom dearly for that, for those tools she gave me. So happy
Absolutely.
Mother's Day to you, Mom. I love you. We love our mothers out there.
Yeah,
And yeah, and to,
absolutely. We want to say thank you to all the folks who advocate for people with disabilities. You do amazing work, and we appreciate you for everything you do.
yeah. Well, let's move forward with this week's topic. This week we are going to talk about the idea of sin in the image of God,
Yep.
and how those relate to disability. Those are in disability theology. Those are big topics, and ones that are important to unpack and take a look at. And that's something that we want to talk about today, especially sin. When it comes to disability, the idea of sin and what does sin play into a person's disability. It is something that is brought up a lot. It's something that in the church, I think in modern days we try to stay away from,
Some,
but some churches
some
do, not
churches.
all churches, and even those that do
Yep.
still don't really know how to stay away from it. So let's get in and let's talk about this a little bit. So Jonathan, why don't you, I'm going to ask you the question: where does this idea of sin and disability come from? Where do we get this idea that sin is equated to disability,
A
or
lot of it comes.
disability is equated to sin?
A lot of it, I think, is just poor reading of scripture,
Yeah.
and honest some intellectual laziness. Um, some of it comes from things like what Paul says in letters, that with sin came death, but we're not unwilling to unpack that. And we're also not willing to do the necessary work of embracing what we've learned from science. And science has been able to show us that death and disability existed long before human beings ever were on this planet. And so, if we're going to be authentic to trying to make that sync up with our faith, we have to be diligent in recognizing that sin and disability are not always linked together the way we seem to treat them. I grew up in one of those church settings that viewed sin and disability as just linked.
Hmm.
And the reality is, I think if we do this seriously, we have to recognize we have to read things like Paul in a different light, and we have to see that he's talking about a spiritual death, and not an actual reality of death. Because, like I said, we know enough from science to know that things died before human beings were ever here. Therefore, things died before sin. Um, but the bigger thing for me is the emotional weight we put on people unnecessarily when we don't unpack those ideas, when we just shrink wrap sin and disability and throw it out and don't actually think about the emotional weight we're putting on people. I Hank could probably speak to this, but I'll speak to about from my experience. It was like an albatross around my neck. It was this idea that this thing that defined me, my disability, was sin. And so I could never separate from sin. And because Jesus was the Savior and was a Savior from sin, it always made me feel that I was always distant from Jesus. I was always doing something wrong. And a lot of people, to be honest, in traditions I was a part of growing up, believed I was doing something wrong. They believed that
Yeah.
if I had enough faith, or to be honest, they believed my parents had sinned, but my father had been married before, so that they believed what these people I loved did brought sin just by having me. they believed, some people believe that because I didn't have enough faith, I still had this reality that was because of sin. And I can just tell you from my experience and from other people's experiences, people with disabilities, it's just a horrible weight that destroys people and really doesn't allow them to connect deeply with the faith.
Yeah.
And so I think we can do better.
Yeah. No, I agree. I agree with you on that. I think we can do a lot better. As you said, it's lazy theology.
Yep.
Um, but my experience has been I get a lot of the your faith isn't strong enough, or I
Yep.
did when I was younger.
Yep.
I have a lot of stories of people trying to pray over me, pray for my healing, pray so that I can walk. And it was
Yep.
always this understanding that your faith needs to be stronger. And if you're not walking, it's because your faith really isn't that strong, in which that in itself equated to that is a sinful thing, right? That if you didn't have strong enough faith, you obviously are a sinful person and you need to cut out whatever it is.
Well, and what's amazing to me is people are so easy to throw this at people with disabilities, and yet they don't do this to themselves.
Right.
Well, you're going to die. You've gotten sick. Why does your faith is your faith not strong enough? But
Right.
they'll have a way to rationalize that for them, but they don't want to give that same grace to people with disabilities, and it's just a shame.
Yeah, no, it really is. But you talked a little bit about scripture from Paul that this idea comes from, but I also, this idea also comes from the gospel stories and frankly the way people understand the healing narratives, which we're going to talk more about
Yep.
healing in our next episode.
Yep.
But this idea of sin comes from some of those scriptures also. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, it's fair to say that there's impression about it, but I like the fact that in John 9, I believe Jesus specifically pushes back on this idea. His disciples are basically, who sinned because this person is blind, him or his parents, and Jesus is like, Nobody's sinned. He's here for the glory of God," and we can unpack that. That somehow, sometimes how people interpret that is nasty and hurtful to people with disabilities too, but there you have Jesus saying, "This isn't as simple as you want to make it. This isn't as simple as society wants to make it," because they want an easy answer. They want to be able to dismiss disability. It makes them uncomfortable. They want to be able to dismiss death. It makes them uncomfortable. But Jesus is all about setting with the realities of human beings. About actually meeting them where they are. And so, this simple theology of we're going to dismiss and just push these people to the margins and not deal with their problems, that's not Christian. That's just
Right.
not a Christian response. The Christian response is recognizing you meet people where they are, and you actually help them deal with what they're facing. You don't dismiss them. And that theology of dismissal of you are sinful or your parents are sinful, Jesus dismantles that in John 9 because he's basically saying, look, it's not that simple. So
Right.
stop acting like it is.
Right.
And that's basically what we want to say. We're basically parroting Jesus here. It's not that simple. So don't throw that stuff out.
Right. And in those other gospel stories where they try to make it that simple,
Yeah.
and because there are other stories that people would point to, and
Yeah.
one story that I always look at is the story of the friends who lower the paralytic
Yeah.
into the room with Jesus, and after he gets up, Jesus says, "Go and sin no more." Well, people automatically equate that sin to his disability
Yep.
because he's been healed, right?
Yep.
And my problem always with that is no, 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 stop. We are a big part of a tradition of our theology says that we all sinned. And so
Yep.
anytime anybody
Yep.
has an experience with Jesus, he would tell them to go sin no more, whether they have a disability or not. So why are we siloing out people with disabilities for that?
Yeah. He
Uh,
says the same thing to the woman that was caught in adultery.
right.
But we don't. And what's amazing to me with that story, and well, actually, this is a little nugget for next time to join us, is that story actually he says in plural, in the plural form, he says, "Your faith has made you well." Them, which is a little, well, that next time we get together and talk about healing, but that talks about the saving work of community. And we don't ever think of it that way, or at least most people never preach it that way. But he's talking about the faith of not only the man being lowered, but all of his friends. And that says something amazing about healing that we'll get into next time. So you're gonna have to listen to us again. Yay!
Exactly. Yay! A little preview for
Preview,
for
absolutely.
episode 3.
Yep.
Um, well, let's talk a little bit also about how this idea of sin, and you talked about this a little bit earlier, but I want you to expand on it a little bit.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how this affects the identity of people with disabilities. When we equate disability with sin so much, what are we doing to the self-esteem of people with disabilities, their own identities? Let's talk about that a little bit.
Well, I mean, again, I think it's helpful to talk about personal stories, and so I'm going to share with you a personal story. But I don't think this is solely connected to me. In fact, I know it is. I've had conversations, similar stories with people with disabilities. But when I was in seminary, I had a friend who was graduating earlier than I was, and he asked to take me out for lunch. And I make the joke that you never ask a seminarian out for lunch because they'll always say yes because we're poor and we. So this guy took me out, and I don't know how his comment came up. When you hear the comment, you'll understand why I don't remember it. But some part of the conversation, he turned to me and he said, "Jonathan, I just want to say you are so lucky." And I was
Mm,
like, "Ooh, free lunch and lucky,
yeah.
man! Thank you." I was feeling all the feels, right? And then
Don't you?
he hit me with a gut punch. He goes, "You're so lucky because you wake up every morning with a mark of your sinfulness."
Ah,
And
oh,
I just remember going, like, I can't even remember what I said. I just remember feeling like everything had been ripped out of my guts, like someone had grabbed my intestines and pulled.
yeah.
And I remember just stumbling back to my dorm room and I didn't know what to do. And so what I did was what most people did. And I turned to friends of mine and they basically said, um, well, I wouldn't have said it that harshly, but yeah. Uh,
So they
um,
agreed with him.
Yeah, they were like, "Yeah, sin is we have disability because of sin, and you just
Wow.
have to deal with that."
And these
And
are Seminarians.
I just remember just people punching me over and over again, and then I remember honestly, I came very, very close to leaving seminary because I was like, I can't do this. I mean, this guy that had said that originally was going off to become a youth director at a major big church in the South. And I was thinking to myself, oh my God, he's going to be teaching kids this,
Mhm.
or young people. I shouldn't say kids, I should know better than that.
Ah,
Young people this.
yeah.
And I was just devastated. And then when my friends were just like, yeah, that's part of life, sin is a disability as a result of sin. And I was like, oh my God. And I was saved by a professor that basically, when I was searching for answers, he basically said, go find your own. And he goes, go actually study what Jesus was doing. And that's what we'll get in next time about the healing piece, because it deserves its own episode. But him opening that door and him saying, go look for answers, led me to realize that we were missing what Jesus was doing. And this idea of wanting to wed so closely sin and disability just destroys people. I mean, it literally almost cost me what I feel is my calling because I just felt
Yeah.
like I couldn't deal with it. And I could honestly, I could turn this into an episode, you probably could too, episode just full of those kind of stories where people just, this idea that they're linked
Yeah.
has just destroyed people's well-being, their soul, to be honest. It's just wounded them. And it's not necessary. It's just not something. If the goal of spreading your faith, the goal of spreading Christianity is this idea of showing people the love of God so it can be transform their lives, you're not doing that when you link this stuff together. You're just not.
Right. Well, and we mess up because when we equate it with sin, um, we we automatically are telling disabled people that there is something wrong and
Yes.
shameful about
Yeah.
themselves,
You're
right?
basically saying to them, you are sin.
Right.
Because my disability is such a part of who I am. Your disability is such a part of who you are. I literally have never known myself outside of my disability. So to say God doesn't want you to have your disability is almost the same thing as saying God doesn't want you to be male. Well, I don't know what that means for me.
Right.
Um, you know, and so I would say to the people that are listening to, especially the folks that are able-bodied, to say, take something about you that is inherently you. Maybe it's your gender, maybe it's your race, and then say, imagine someone saying to you, "Oh, don't worry, someday you won't be one woman in heaven,"
Yeah.
or "Someday you won't be white in heaven." Well, guess what? People have said, I'm sure they've said to you, but they've said to me, several people, "Oh, don't worry, Jonathan, someday you won't have your disability in heaven." And I'm just like,
That
what
that's
does
not
that
my
mean?
identity. Why
Yeah,
why would
yeah.
I yeah, why would I
So
not want to be disabled? Yeah.
to me, I hear that as, "Don't worry, Jonathan, someday you won't be in heaven." And you're just like, well, thanks, I
Yeah.
guess.
Well, because when you tell people that,
Yeah.
or if you tell disabled people, especially people who I have spent most of my life in a wheelchair, you have spent all of your life being somebody with cerebral palsy,
Yep.
you're telling them that everything that they know, everything that they are used to, is not going to be as it is, and
It's not coming with you. Yeah.
yeah, and that's problematic for me, right? And it creates within itself what we would call an internalized ableism,
Yep.
right? For a lot of disabled people who take that on within themselves, they they automatically tell themselves that there's something wrong with them, right? And that they always strive to be something other than what they are, and that has self-esteem issues,
Yeah.
and that has so many problems with it because when you tell yourself being disabled is wrong or broken or shameful, then you're always trying to overcome it,
Yeah.
and in a way that i i I have been in a wheelchair for 33 years now. For the rest of my life, I'm never not going to be in a wheelchair. But if I spend all of my life trying not to be in a
Wanting to get
wheelchair
out of the
rather than
wheelchair.
just living my life, that's a problem. And that's I don't think that's what God has called me to do.
Let's take the I don't think. It isn't. God
Right.
doesn't want anybody to spend every waking moment trying to escape something they can't possibly escape.
Right.
And yet that's what we set up when we say your disability shouldn't be here. Well, when you have your disability, and you're always going to have your disability, you can easily spend all your life trying to get it away instead of saying, okay, how do I live out a faithful life with this reality?
Right.
That's the conversation we should have with people, not the other
Exactly. Well, let's start about the conversation we should be having, but let's
one.
start with scripture. Let's try to rethink this
Yep.
idea of well, sin, and let's try to tie it to the idea of the image of God.
Yeah.
And let's start with the creation story, right? Let's start all the way
Yeah.
back at Genesis. Now,
So yeah.
go ahead.
Sorry,
No, you're
didn't want
fine.
to cut that. But I think Richard Rohr, he's a Catholic theologian, I think has wonderful wisdom here that is really a part of disability theology, although he doesn't work in the field. Um, he basically says, and this is something that Protestants are really guilty of. He says, we oftentimes start the story with Genesis 3, right?
Hmm.
Genesis 3 is the fall. We often start the story with the fall, but that's not where the story starts. Obviously, Genesis
Right.
1 is the beginning of the Bible and the beginning of the story of creation. And that story isn't about sin. That
Right.
story isn't about human beings screwing up. That story is about God's goodness, and specifically God putting God's goodness into all of creation, including us. Verse 17 of that chapter says, let us make people in our image, right?
Right.
And what's more beautiful about this story is it's an epic poem, and it's every day has something God creates. So every day God creates, and every single day, God steps back. Metaphorically, God doesn't actually step,
Right.
but God looks at what God does every day, and at the end of every day, God says, "It is good." And
Right.
he and God does that every single day. And at the end of the sixth day, the last part of creation, when God creates us, human beings, God says about everything, it is very good.
Right.
And so, this idea of the image of God, God putting goodness into us, um, is a powerful idea. Christians have argued about what does it mean to be made in the image of God. Uh, the term is imago Dei. What does it mean? What does it mean to be made in the image of God? In the Western Church, it's often been defined as our ability to think.
Right.
Um, but what's I think more helpful is what our brothers and sisters in the Eastern Church have done. They take it and really look at it Trinitarian and a Trinitarian mindset. And so they talk about God and understanding what the Trinity is, the triune nature of God. They say, look at it as the Father is the lover, Jesus is the beloved, and the love that connects them is the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
And so they talk about the Trinity as a community, as a relationship of love. And to
Yeah.
me, that's much healthier than the Western mindset of our ability to think and process and reason. Because as people that work with folks with disabilities, as people myself who have a learning disability, the idea that God is wrapped up in my thinking or my inability to sometimes process and think is not helpful. But the idea that God is in love, God is in relationship, oh man, that's amazing. And then to think that that's who we are down deep. Richard Rohr's point is if you take the first story and you say that's the start of our story, then his point is at the base, at the bottom of who everyone is God's goodness.
Right.
So at the base of what everybody is, every human being is goodness, not sin, goodness.
Right.
And I think that's a powerful idea that we all Christians need to embrace.
Yeah, because and you're right, because we always there's a tendency often to start with that idea of well, everybody is sinful, and so
Yep.
we that idea that we are all created as these sinful beings, and we all trying to escape that sinfulness. But it does such a difference when you start with that. No, 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 no. We were created good, and
Yep.
that's what we need to emphasize. Yes, we do sinful things, and yes, we shy away from that goodness. But
Yeah.
no, at our heart, we are good, and that's how God created us. And
And
I
I
love that. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
no, I feel bad to keep stepping on you.
No,
But
you're
again,
fine.
we're learning this podcast thing,
Yeah,
right? So think now, we talked about how the idea of sin can really destroy someone's self-esteem. Now imagine the story they hear is even when you screw up, you're still good down deep.
yeah,
And we're going to help you figure a way to open that up more. That is life-giving.
yeah,
That is self-esteem giving, I think.
yeah. Well, and I also like this idea that I think at our heart, you talked about this relational triune God. In our At our heart, we are created to be relational beings, right? And our deep down, we all know this, right? Because we can't survive without being in relationships,
Yep.
either relationships with other people or relationships with other creation, whether it be the earth or the animals. We can't survive as human beings without those relationships. Um, and that's the way that God created us to be in relationship. I always, anytime I give talks over this, I always really emphasize that part in 17 that you emphasize, where it says, God looked around and said, "Let us create them in our image." And
Yeah.
there's a lot of theological debates over what does the "us" mean, right? And I say, what, I don't exactly know what it means or what the original writers tried to mean. What it means to me, though, is that at the very beginning, God was in community, right?
Yep.
And that
And
in
God wanted community and wanted us to be in community. Absolutely.
Right. And to be in the image of God, to be like God, is to also be beings that are in community. That
Yep.
is that is essentially what we are created to be. So what does that mean for people with disabilities, though? Why is that community part so important, or that relational part so important for people with disabilities? What do you think, John?
Well, I think that as a person with a disability, I think you learn at very early on that you are dependent on other people. And as Americans, especially, we look down upon the idea of dependence. But um, the reality is we are all dependent.
Right.
Um, every one of us is dependent. I like to use the example of what did you eat for breakfast this morning? Well, for me, I ate eggs, right? And I drank coffee. Well, here's the thing: I don't have chickens in my backyard. I don't have whatever coffee grows on.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have coffee beans to pick. I didn't grind them. Somebody did all that work. Somebody
Right.
got all that stuff to the store. I was dependent on them. Dependence isn't a bad thing. It's a reality of human life. And I would argue it is a necessary reality, a reality that God wanted us in so that we would recognize our dependence on each other. So ultimately, we would recognize our dependence on God.
Right. There's a disability theologian who had a book several years ago. His name is Thomas Reynolds, and his book is called Vulnerable Communion. He writes a lot about this idea that
Yeah,
we are created to be beings that depend on one another, whether you're disabled or not. We all depend on one another,
yeah,
because um, because to be created means that we have vulnerabilities, but we also have strengths, and those things those were created that way so that we do depend on one another, so that we can move forward as humanity or as creation.
yeah.
And I think that's important to look at, and that's, as you said, that's really important for people with disabilities, um, because whether we like it or not, we often, and because the societies we live in that don't center around people with disabilities, we really have to depend on people, and we have to depend on our relationships to really survive and succeed in this world. Now and there are some people with disabilities that would push back against this idea because
Yeah.
they don't want to
Well,
be seen as
I
vulnerable.
would
But
where I would say that that individual who tried to be my friend was right was my disability does bless me because it has stripped me of the illusion that I can succeed solely on my own, that
right,
I can live solely on my own. But that's something everybody should be stripped of because we need everybody. We need each other. That's the whole point. And we need God. That's the central tenet of our
exactly,
faith is we all need God.
yeah.
So this idea that I can be good on my own is something we all need to be stripped of.
Exactly. Yeah, because we all, on some level, depend on other people,
Absolutely.
and none of us would ever be able to survive on our own. Um,
Absolutely not.
yeah. Well, so let's go back and talk about sin a little bit more,
Yeah, because
to wrap this whole idea up. So
we don't want to get people listening to this podcast and think we are jettisoning the idea of sin or the idea that disability theology jettisons the idea of sin. It doesn't. It just simply says we need to understand it in a different way. We need to recognize that we have had a very shallow sense of what it is. So let's look at it through the lens of the triune God, right?
right,
So if we're going to look at it through the idea of the triune God, we believe that God is in God's very nature relationship. We don't know what that means because it's a mystery. It's not a relationship like we have, but we believe it is a relationship. Then sin is counter to relationship. So sin can best be understood by that which is done or not done that breaks down community, that breaks down relationships.
right.
That's what disability theology argues is sin. And when we don't talk about it that way, we're not really talking about sin.
Yeah. Sin is that idea that instead of embracing those around us as people who are created by God just like us, we
Yeah.
push them away and we deny that relationship with them. And in denying that relationship with them, we are denying the image of God that resides within ourselves.
And we can do this, of course, with ourselves too. When we deny the reality that we need each other or that we need God, we're denying who we are, and therefore we're breaking that relationship. And again, that is sin as well. But sin is not this thing that affects certain people and doesn't affect others. This reality of sin is a reality of a corruption of relation,
Yeah.
corruption of community. And that is what sin is in the best definition.
And let's talk about it. Relationship doesn't just mean that that you take care of someone, or
Yeah.
that you pity someone, or even that you just acknowledge someone, right?
Yeah.
Relationship is a give and take thing, and this is important. This is important for me in the work that I do, that try to get people recognized within churches, disabled people recognized
Yeah.
within churches, to not just be there, but to be a actual part of the community. Is
Yeah.
that recognizing that people with disabilities have something to bring to a relationship, and we
Absolutely.
can't just dismiss them as, oh, you know what, this is somebody I need to take care of. No, no,
Yeah.
no, no. You need to see what you get out of that relationship also, right? And see what that person has to offer a relationship, if that disabled person wants to be in a relationship with you at all, right? Um, yeah,
Absolutely. And caring for each other is part of being in a relationship. So
yeah,
this idea that we need people to take care of us, that doesn't make us less than human. It makes us human, because
right,
we all need to care for and be cared for. And when we stop that, which I feel like I see my able-bodied brothers and sisters all the time not ask for help. And you even hear it as a pastor all the time. Well, I don't want to burden people. Being a burden is a reality of being human.
right,
First of all, you aren't a burden.
right,
You give someone the opportunity to care for you. That's a blessing.
right,
And and so this idea that I can't show you my vulnerability, that's sin,
right,
because that's not being in authentic community. Again, we come back to the community piece. Not showing your weaknesses, not asking for help, is to deny the goodness of community, and
right.
is to sin against it.
Right. And not allowing, going back to what I was talking about earlier, not allowing disabled people to care for you,
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
not allowing disabled people to come in and be caregivers within a community,
Yeah,
or be the ones who
absolutely.
offer something in a community, because we see that a lot. We see that a lot within the church. Disabled people aren't allowed to take leadership roles, or take roles in a church, because there's an assumption that they have nothing to bring, nothing to offer. And that's
Yeah,
just simply not true.
absolutely.
And that's not recognizing all that they have, and the gifts they have, in the true, authentic relationship they bring.
And it's not recognizing the image of God that's in them. If
Right.
you believe that the image of God, if you believe all this, any of this stuff we've been talking about, if you believe the image of God is this idea of goodness, if you believe the image of God is in everybody, if you believe the image of God is connected to relationship, then by not allowing someone into your midst as the possibility of serving you, you are denying the fact that they have the image of God.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's all problematic. Um, is there anything we haven't covered yet with sin and disability? So how do individuals work on this idea? I want to say, how do they recover from this uh, misnotion of sin and disability?
I think by always starting with the doctor. It's always start with, it's a good place to start with everything. Start with the doctrine of the Trinity, and then look through it. Say, okay, um, relationship is what we're called into being. So, what does sin look like? What does then blessing look like within that idea of community? It's the idea of recognizing that sin isn't this kind of uh, deep part of who we are. It's the thing that covers up and hides the real reality of who we are. And I think that's the biggest shift to make in people's minds, is to recognize that at your essence, I know we're going to aggravate some Calvinists here, but we're not Calvinists, so we're going to do it anyway, right? I still love you, Calvinist brothers and sisters. I just don't agree with you. At the essence of humanity is goodness.
Right.
At the essence of everybody is goodness. So what sin is the covering, is the yucky part that covers over who we really are. And what God's grace does is help us clean off that gunk, so that we can really magnify what we really are, and we can magnify to the world the goodness of God.
That ook and that gunk. I love it.
Yes.
I love
Yes,
it.
again, I love your Calvinist brothers and sisters. Just don't agree with you.
Uh, well, very good. Jonathan, this is good stuff, my friend. Thank you
I
for
think so
bringing
too.
that
Absolutely.
knowledge. You're bringing that Princeton Theological Seminary education
Yes,
to.
I'm bringing. I am using the. If you don't know, and most of you probably don't, Princeton is a Reformed seminary. They are Calvinists. So I am using the skills they taught me against them. Ha ha!
Take that, Calvinist.
Take that,
No,
Calvinist.
no, we love our Calvinist brothers and sisters, as you said.
Absolutely.
Well, good stuff, man. Well, this
Yep.
has been a good conversation. I'm
Yep.
very excited about it. I'm excited for people to listen to it.
Yep.
And I'm really excited for them to listen to the next conversation that we're going to have, which is over this idea, as we've been talking about, this idea of healing. And what does that mean? Do you want to give it a little preview to us?
Yeah, we previewed a little bit, but literally it'll blow your mind. And I really mean this. It is, learning this was what kept me at seminary and made me understand I could be a Christian and be a clergy person. I mean this with all sincerity. And other than the mistake of the Christian church denying the fact that Jesus was Jewish and understanding that, I think this is the next big mistake the Christian church has made. We have totally missed the boat on what it means to be a healer in the ancient world, what it meant to be a Jewish healer, and what Jesus was doing. And we're going to take some of these stories and show you the real work he was doing. And when we do, you'll never see these stories. You'll never see Jesus's story. You'll never see what it means to be a Christian the same. I don't know if I am not overselling this. I mean this. So check out our next episode.
Good stuff. You know what? Yeah, I'm glad you sold it that way. That is good stuff. All right. Well, friends, we are glad you joined us once again this week. Join us again next week for episode 3 of the Accessible God podcast. We hope you have a good week. Take it easy.
Blessings.